My boyfriend's parents mocked me for renting a tiny apartment and said I'd never belong in their family. 2 weeks later, they walked into my boardroom asking me to save their company. I'm Sophia Bennett, 36 years old, and the first thing my boyfriend's mother noticed when I stepped out of Noah's car wasn't my smile or the flowers in my hand. It was the hem of my dress. Her eyes skimmed over the navy fabric, paused for a fraction too long, then moved on. No designer logo, no recognizable label. Whatever she'd hoped to find wasn't there. Only then did she smile. "Noah," she said, smoothing an invisible crease from his jacket without looking at me. "You've lost weight. Are you eating properly?" "I'm fine, Mom." Her gaze returned to me, calm and measuring. "So, you're Sophia." "I am. It's nice to finally meet you, Mrs. Whitmore." "Oh, please," she replied with polished ease. "Call me Miranda." She never said it was nice to meet me. That told me everything I needed to know. Noah squeezed my hand. His palm was damp. He already knew how this evening would unfold. The Blackwood Ridge Country Club looked exactly the way families like the Whitmores like to present themselves: gleaming marble, crystal chandeliers, fresh lilies, and conversations kept just quiet enough to sound refined. I'd been inside grander buildings. I'd approved renovations for hotels worth more than this entire property. Still, I followed Miranda through the lobby without correcting a single assumption. Being underestimated has its advantages. Richard Whitmore was waiting in the private dining room. He stayed seated as I walked in, lifting his glass of scotch just enough to acknowledge my presence before studying me with cool, practiced detachment. "So," he said, before anyone reached for a menu, "Noah tells us you work in operations." "I do. Operations where?" "A logistics company." He tilted his head. "That's vague." "It usually is." He waited for me to elaborate. I didn't. Miranda filled the silence instead. "So, Sophia, tell us about your family." "My mother is retired." "And your father?" "He passed away when I was 16. For an instant, something almost sympathetic crossed her face before disappearing. "I'm sorry." "Thank you." Richard folded his hands. "Any family investments?" "No." "Property?" "My mother owns her home." "And you?" "I rent a one-bedroom apartment downtown." Richard exchanged a quick glance with Miranda. "So Noah's been paying for most of your dates?" I met his eyes. "No." Neither of them said another word. She dabbed her lips with her napkin. "Renting isn't easy these days." She took another sip of wine. "I suppose it's easier when you don't have children to think about." The smile never left her face. Neither did the insult. The words were gentle. The meaning wasn't. Sophia's smile never quite reached her eyes after that. Richard continued eating as if the conversation had never happened, but every few minutes he'd glance at me, measuring, calculating. Miranda carried the discussion through dessert, asking polite questions that sounded more like background checks than genuine curiosity. Noah barely touched his food. He kept reaching for his water, then setting the glass down untouched. When the coffee arrived, Richard folded his napkin and placed it beside his plate. "Noah." "Yes?" "Your mother and I need a word." He was already standing. Noah looked at me apologetically, then followed them into the hallway without a single objection. The doors closed. I checked my watch. 12 minutes. That was how long they left me sitting alone. The waiter offered to refill my water again. "I'm fine," I said with a smile. He nodded and quietly disappeared. Rain streaked the terrace windows, blurring the lights outside. Around me, conversations continued as though nothing unusual had happened, but every now and then I caught someone glancing toward the woman sitting alone at a table set for 3. I wasn't embarrassed. If anything, I felt strangely calm. By the time Noah came back, I already knew what he was going to say. His face was pale. "Could we step outside?" The cold air hit us the moment we reached the terrace. He kept his eyes on the golf course instead of me. "I'm sorry." I let him find the words. "My parents won't accept this." I figured. They think if I marry someone without the right background. He stopped, swallowing hard. "They'll cut me out of everything. I just need a little more time. My parents will calm down. Just don't give up on me yet." I looked at him. "You already had 6 months." His face fell. That was my answer. I don't know what else to do. Something inside me went quiet. The uncertainty was gone. The answer hurt, but at least it was finally clear. The answer hurt, but uncertainty disappeared with it. I slipped the silver ring from my finger and placed it gently into his hand. "Sophia, you chose them. I love you." I closed his fingers around the ring. "I know you meant it, but when it mattered most, you still let me go." He reached toward me. I stepped back. "I'm sorry." "I know." I turned and walked toward the parking lot without looking back. Before my car reached the front gate, my laptop was already open. My CFO had sent a restructuring proposal that needed my approval before morning. Work had never waited for heartbreak. Neither would I. The next morning, I arrived at Apex Global Logistics before sunrise. Most people in the building assumed I simply liked early mornings. Only a handful knew I owned the company. That anonymity had taken years to build, and I wasn't about to throw it away for the sake of one family's surprise. Tuesday morning arrived beneath a blanket of steel gray clouds. By 6:30, I'd already reviewed overnight reports from Seattle. 45 minutes later, I approved a warehouse modernization project in Dallas, then finished a call with our European team before 8. Routine had a way of steadying me. David knocked lightly before stepping inside. They're on schedule. So they left? About 15 minutes ago. They'll be here at 8:45. He handed me a coffee. Security's ready. No one outside this floor knows who's coming. Good. I wanted a business meeting, not a performance. At 8:43, David set a tablet on my desk. They've arrived. The lobby camera filled the screen. Richard adjusted his tie for what had to be the fourth time. At dinner, he'd looked completely in control. Now he couldn't seem to stand still. Miranda held her handbag tightly against her lap, her fingers twisting the leather handle until her knuckles turned pale. Noah looked worse than either of them. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His beard had grown in unevenly, and he stared across the lobby without really seeing it. He hasn't been sleeping, David murmured. I know. They waited in the garage almost 20 minutes before coming inside. They needed to convince themselves this meeting would save them. David glanced toward me. Do you think they're frightened? I think reality finally caught up. Conference room A. Overlooked the financial district through floor-to-ceiling windows. Richard paced the room while Miranda remained perfectly still. Noah sat nearest the door, elbows on his knees, his hands locked together so tightly his knuckles had turned white. They're arguing, David said, watching another camera angle. There isn't any audio. There doesn't need to be. Richard's sharp gestures said enough. Miranda tried calming him. Noah shook his head once, then looked away. Patrick arrived a few minutes later carrying the final acquisition binder. Everything's ready. I flipped through the tabs. Financial statements, legal opinions, forensic accounting. Every conclusion independently verified. Patrick hesitated. Can I ask something? Go ahead. They're expecting the CEO? Yes. They still don't know it's you. They're about to. He gave a small nod. Patrick gave a small sigh. I almost feel sorry for them. I closed the binder. They had every chance to avoid this. He understood and quietly left. 22 minutes later, David returned. They've been waiting. Good. Waiting strips away confidence better than confrontation ever could. I slipped on my charcoal suit, gathered the binder, and walked toward conference room A. Outside the door, David rested his hand on the handle. They're all standing. I looked through the narrow glass panel. Richard straightened his jacket. Miranda fixed a practiced smile. Noah stared at the door, hope flickering across his face despite everything. He still believed there was something left to save. Ready? David asked. I nodded. Open it. The door swung inward. Richard stood immediately. There must be some mistake. We were told the CEO would be joining us. I walked past him without slowing down. I just did. David quietly closed the conference room doors behind me. No one spoke. Miranda's hand flew to her mouth. Noah didn't move at all. Recognition swept across his face, followed by disbelief. I walked past them without a word, took the seat at the head of the table, set the binder down, and folded my hands. Only then did I look up. The silence stretched for several seconds before Richard finally found his voice. Ms. Bennett? Good morning, Mr. Whitmore. Miranda whispered my name as if saying it aloud might somehow change what she was seeing. It didn't. The woman she'd dismissed as ordinary was the CEO they had spent 6 months trying to meet. Richard remained on his feet. His grip tightened around the back of the chair until his knuckles turned white. Miranda looked from me to the Apex logo etched into the glass wall, as if she still expected someone to explain that this was all a misunderstanding. Noah never looked away. His expression said he was replaying every conversation we'd ever had, searching for the moment he'd missed the truth. There won't be one, I said, opening the acquisition binder. Please, have a seat. Richard sat first. Miranda followed. Noah hesitated before choosing the chair closest to the door. I opened the first tab. Whitmore Industrial Group, our due diligence is complete. Richard cleared his throat. Ms. Bennett, before we... I raised a hand. Today we're discussing your company. He fell silent. I turned a page. Your debt level is roughly 3 times what your current operations can reasonably support. Another page. You've renegotiated loan covenants twice in 18 months without correcting the underlying problems. I slid a financial report across the table. Our forensic review also found nearly $5 million in revenue recognized before it should have been. Richard's jaw tightened. We intended to correct those entries next quarter. So you agree they shouldn't have been recorded? He opened his mouth, then stopped. Teresa, seated beside me, calmly took over. Our review includes internal emails from your finance department discussing those reporting decisions. Every document has been independently verified. Richard leaned back slowly. For the first time since entering the room, he looked uncertain. Miranda broke the silence. There has to be some mistake. There isn't, Teresa replied. I watched Miranda's eyes move around the room. The attorneys, the analysts, the stacks of organized reports. Everyone here worked for me. The realization settled over her in painful stages. Miranda looked toward Richard. He wouldn't meet her eyes. Only then did she whisper, I was wrong. I didn't answer. We judged you unfairly. You did. We didn't know. No, I said evenly. You made sure you didn't. She lowered her eyes. We thought... I know what you thought. Noah finally spoke. Sophia, His voice was barely above a whisper. I know I don't deserve this conversation. I met his eyes. But could we talk about us? There isn't an us anymore. His shoulders dropped. I made the biggest mistake of my life. I know. I've regretted it every day. I don't doubt that. I held his gaze. But regret doesn't change the decision you already made. He looked down at the table. When I proposed to you, I meant every word. I know. But you still walked away. He looked up again. Then why? Because love isn't always enough. The words hung between us. He had no answer. Neither did I. Richard pushed back his chair. This is ridiculous. Teresa looked up. Mr. Whitmore, please remain seated. My son's personal life has nothing to do with this. Exactly, I said. This meeting is about your company. He slowly sat down again. I turned to the final page of the report. Our investment committee has reached a decision. Richard leaned forward. Miranda held her breath. Noah watched me without blinking. The manufacturing assets still have value. Richard relaxed slightly. The employees deserve better leadership. Miranda nodded hopefully. I signed the recommendation letter. However, Apex Global Logistics will not proceed with this acquisition. Richard stared at the signature. No. His voice cracked. You're making a mistake. I slid the signed recommendation toward him. No, Mr. Whitmore. I held his gaze. You decided who I was before dinner was served. My team didn't reach a decision until every page had been read. That's the difference between prejudice and evidence. The conference room doors closed behind the Whitmores without another word. I watched them on the lobby security monitor until the elevator doors slid shut. Richard walked in front. Miranda followed, wiping at mascara she'd long since stopped trying to save. Noah lingered behind them. Just before the elevator closed, he looked up toward my floor. Then he disappeared. David stepped into my office. They're gone. Any problems? None. He set a folder on my desk. Legal needs your approval to close the acquisition file. I signed it without hesitation. Done! One more thing. He handed me his tablet. A voicemail. Richard's voice filled the office. Ms. Bennett, I'd appreciate another opportunity to discuss a possible partnership. My comments at dinner were based on unfortunate assumptions. The message ended. I locked the screen and set the tablet aside. There was nothing left to say. 17 days later, Patrick dropped the morning paper onto my desk. The headline said everything. Whitmore Industrial Files for Chapter 11. Bankruptcy Protection. Patrick looked up from the paper. The reception desk says reporters are downstairs. I folded the newspaper. They're here for the bankruptcy. They're here because they think you'll comment. I won't. Teresa's forecast had been almost exact. One missed payment triggered a loan default. Banks called in their credit lines. Suppliers froze deliveries. Within days, the company unraveled. The employees? I asked. Patrick nodded. The court approved temporary payroll protection. Good. Richard had made the decisions. His workers shouldn't have carried the cost. Over the following weeks, the news kept coming. The Whitmore estate went on the market. Their country club quietly suspended their membership. Investor lawsuits followed. Then Teresa called. Richard testified today. How did it go? He denied everything. And we introduced Exhibit D, the internal emails. His own executives had documented every questionable accounting decision. Teresa was quiet for a moment. He looked older than the last time I saw him. I understood what she meant. Some losses show up on a balance sheet. Others settle into a person's face. By February, Miranda had filed for divorce. No interviews. No dramatic statements. Just another legal notice buried in the business section. Noah struggled to find work. No one blamed him for the accounting. But his last name had become difficult to separate from the collapse. One rainy afternoon, I found the silver engagement ring tucked behind a notebook in my desk drawer. I turned it over in my hand. For a moment, I was back on that rooftop, sharing cheap pizza while Noah nervously promised he'd replace it with a diamond someday. For a second, I smiled. Then I closed my hand around the ring and dropped it into the wastebasket. I pulled the next file toward me and got back to work. Nearly 6 months slipped by. Work filled the days. 2 acquisitions closed that spring. We opened a new distribution hub outside Phoenix, and Patrick earned a promotion to Director of Strategic Investments after leading one of the toughest restructurings we'd ever handled. When I announced it, he blinked in surprise. I thought I had another year. You earned it months ago. After the meeting, he lingered in my office. Can I ask you something? You usually do. He hesitated. Do you ever wish you'd told Noah who you really were? I looked through the office windows at the city below. No. Not even now? Especially not now. He waited. I wasn't hiding my company, I said. I wanted to know how someone treated a woman they believed had nothing to offer except herself. He nodded slowly. I guess the answer came sooner than either of you expected. It did. Early that summer, I flew home to Cincinnati. My mother had finally retired. Her little brick house hadn't changed. The wind chimes still hung beside the porch. My father's maple tree shaded half the yard. She hugged me before I could set down my bag. You look happier. I am. We spent the afternoon planting flowers instead of talking about board meetings and lawsuits. As the sun disappeared behind the trees, she broke the silence. I read about the Whitmores. I figured. They're saying you ruined them. I looked out across the backyard. They walked into the storm long before they met me. I just refused to call it sunshine. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Your father would have been proud. No award I'd ever received meant as much as those 5 words. A month later, I accepted an invitation to speak at a leadership conference. Instead of opening with company statistics, I told them about losing my father at 16. I spent years believing success meant nothing could ever hurt me again, I said. I was wrong. When the session ended, a young woman waited until everyone else had left. My family says people like us never belong in rooms like this. I smiled. They're wrong. She smiled back through tears before quietly walking away. Late that autumn, David placed an envelope on my desk. No return address. Inside was a handwritten letter. Noah had found work managing logistics for a regional nonprofit. He wrote that he finally understood why I'd valued honesty more than appearances. He wasn't asking me to come back. He simply wanted me to know he was trying to become someone better. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. No reply? David asked. No. Some stories don't need another conversation. Winter returned. Snow drifted past my office windows as David handed me a cup of coffee. The reporters keep asking the same question. Which one? Why you didn't save Whitmore Industrial? I smiled. If another company had brought us the same financial reports, we'd have made the same decision. So it was never revenge. No, it was business. He nodded. I thought so. That night I left the office long after sunset. Across the street, Blackwood Ridge Country Club glowed with holiday lights, looking every bit as polished as it had the night I first met the Whitmores. They'd decided who I was before the appetizers arrived. Nothing that happened afterward changed their minds. Until the boardroom. Snow settled across the sidewalk as I unlocked my car. The headlights swept across the empty road. For a moment, I pictured my father's old toolbox beside our kitchen door and my mother balancing bills late at night. Everything I had now began in that little house. I started the engine and pulled away. This time, I didn't glance in the rearview mirror. The traffic light turned green. I drove on. That was the last time I ever thought about the Whitmores.